Hello everyone, this is PCB, your trusted PCB partner. Today we will introduce the solder mask layer in KICD and its applications. The solder mask layer is commonly known as green oil, but nowadays there are many color options available: blue, black, and more. It is applied over the surface of the copper foil to prevent oxidation of the copper and copper traces. At the same time, the solder mask bridge can also prevent solder from flowing between component pads during soldering, especially for smaller chips, to avoid short circuits between two joints. Understanding the application methods of the solder mask layer and the usage rules of solder mask in KICD can help us design our projects more effectively. First, let's take a look at the actual effect of the solder mask layer. We can start by viewing it in the 3D rendering. The green areas here represent the solder mask, but the solder mask bridge cannot be displayed in the 3D rendering. Although it appears to be missing here, it actually exists. Let's take a look at the actual effect. This is what the real solder mask bridge looks like. There is solder mask between these pads, which helps prevent short circuits between the two pins during soldering. If the solder mask is not done properly, or if it is designed too small for the manufacturer to produce, it can easily cause short circuits during soldering and increase the difficulty of the soldering process. In KICD, the solder mask layer is a negative image. The graphic objects on this layer represent areas that will not be covered with solder mask. The copper foil will be directly exposed to the air, which is called an opening. Let's take a look at what this means. So, I select the top solder mask layer, then I select this line, and I draw a segment. I'm drawing this segment, then I'll adjust its width to match the trace width. My trace width is 0.5. So I set it to 0.5. Then you can see here, there's a section of solder mask, the purple part. Next, let's look at the 3D view. Look, there's a yellow section here. What does yellow mean? In the 3D rendering, yellow represents copper. It means the copper is directly exposed with no solder mask covering it. That's the effect. Since the solder mask is a negative layer, the minimum width of the solder mask bridge refers to the physical solder mask layer, not the graphic objects in the coding. From a layer perspective, it means the minimum allowable spacing between graphic objects. The minimum width of the solder mask bridge is always global, similar to the minimum width of a region. Although the solder mask layer is a negative layer, this means that if the gap between two graphic objects in the solder mask layer is less than the set value, these objects will merge together when generating the Gerber file. Let's take a look at the effect on the right. This is the normal width. If the solder mask layer does not fall below the minimum spacing, then the middle can be effectively separated. If the gap is too small, then during production, this section will not be coated. When the solder mask is sprayed, it will make it very difficult to connect these two pads during soldering, which can easily lead to a short circuit. The reason is that the board manufacturer's process cannot guarantee that the solder mask polymer will stay on the circuit board. It may peel off. Therefore, when designing and producing, you need to take into account the manufacturing capabilities of the board factory you are using. You should be aware of the board factory's recommended solder mask layer specifications, which are generally 0.15 millimeters or 0.1 millimeters. If you need a smaller value, then you must first confirm with the board factory whether the solder mask bridge you designed can actually be manufactured effectively. What other applications are there for solder mask on a PCB? In addition to the solder mask we just discussed, the solder mask layer can also be used to create openings. Just like the effect we showed earlier, this is simply called an opening. And the most common application, which most of us have seen, is the gold finger. Everyone should be familiar with this. Gold fingers are typically designed as pads or traced usually as pads. When designing the pads, the solder mask layer is omitted so that during production, this part is not coated with solder mask, exposing the copper. This allows for effective contact, and it's the most common application. Another approach is to increase the current capacity. For example, if we have a trace here, I only set up a section, but in this case, a full trace is set up. For example, here, since it needs to carry a large current, but it's not possible to provide enough trace width, you can choose to open a solder mask window above the trace. In this case, only a narrow window is opened, but sometimes the entire trace is exposed, allowing for a thicker layer of solder to be applied. If the current is even higher, it's common to add a copper layer, copper foil, copper plate, or copper wire on top. That is, on this exposed trace, I can add another wire to help this trace effectively carry a large current. Alright, that's all for today's content. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more videos. Thank you so very much, everyone.